We switched to English at that point for a pre-recorded segment. Welcome Craig Jones to our annual conference Cybersecurity Digital. Craig Jones leads Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate and is the senior responsible owner for its global cybercrime program. Reducing the global impact of cybercrime, protecting communities for a safer world, those are the core goals of the Directorate. The program focuses on cybercrime threat response, cybercrime operations, cybercrime capabilities development for law enforcement globally. Mr. Jones oversees all aspects of the program, from tactical to operational and strategic, highlighting public-private partnerships in order to provide and augment cybercrime data availability. Given the global scope of the task, Mr. Jones coordinates and oversees both regional and global working groups in order to provide tailor-made agendas. So he leads numerous externally funded projects within the Directorate, like the Cyber Foundation Project or Global Action on Cybercrime Extended, just to name two of them. Prior to joining Interpol, Mr. Jones held several senior operational and coordination management positions in the UK law enforcement, most recently at the National Crime Agency in the UK. Welcome, Mr. Jones. It's an honor to have you right at the beginning of this year's conference in order to have a closer look at current developments. So we'd like to start with our keynote with the caption, Coordinating a Global Response to Cyber Threats, Interpol's Fight Against Cybercrime.
Andreas, thank you very much for those very kind words and introduction, and also for allowing me to speak at such a prestigious event. I'm a little bit closer to Europe than I was previously, as I'm currently back in the UK before I go to headquarters in Lyon tomorrow for some more meetings. And in fact, tomorrow's meetings and the next few days are looking at redesigning and redeveloping our current crime programs. As you highlighted there, I lead the cybercrime program, and that's been running now from Interpol since 2016. But like any program project, we have to remain up to date. We have to ensure that the capabilities we're looking to provide to member countries and for our member countries are being used. They're practical, but also the supporting structure we have around that as well is as modern as it can be. Now, when we look at the program as it was, that was set up in 2016. I think a number of us that have been involved in cybercrime, either on a national, regional or international basis, will sometimes be surprised, or maybe not so surprised, at the speed of events, the way things develop. And the criminals are very good at taking those developments, looking at those vulnerabilities, and then changing their tactics, techniques and procedures to maximise those opportunities for them to cause harm. Now, we look at harm policing through a number of different lenses. The main role of policing is the protection of life and property and the prevention of crime. So that is very much the same in an online crime space here. The main objective here is to protect life. But also then we look at the sort of prevention aspect. And the way we're looking to move the programme now for policing is a lot more into that prevention space. Now, we're very good at doing that in a physical sense. We're very good at doing crime prevention. We know our business as law enforcement officials right across the world at doing that physical. But when it comes to that online prevention, that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult for us. Not because we don't want to, but sometimes we don't necessarily have the skills or capabilities. And I suspect we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But actually, when you look at identification of vulnerabilities, so where are the sort of weaknesses that the criminals can exploit, the technology industry, the private sector, the cybersecurity threat intel organisations, the national computer emergency response teams, they're the ones that see those. They see them on a national basis. But also when you look at international organisations and companies, they're the ones that have that information. Now, it's quite difficult for them to then turn that sometimes into prevention and how do they share that with law enforcement? And then how do law enforcement then share that into the communities effectively? So as you highlighted at the start, part of our programme is very much looking at those public-private partnerships. It's not about Interpol doing everything, far from it. What we have to be able to be is that neutral interlocutor. And that's one of our unique positions that we hold. So a little bit like the United Nations, we're a members or states-based organisation. We only look at crime. So we have our convention. Within our articles, we have Article 3 that only allows us to be involved in crime matters. So it's got a political, military or racial content to it. We are then not able to then deal with it with our member countries. That's down to the countries to deal with. But it makes our mandate very clear as well. So we specifically look at the crime side. So within the cybercrime, how do we prevent this? Now, within the programme that we now have, we have 3 core pillars that we work to. We have cybercrime threat response, cybercrime operations, and cyber strategy and capability development. Now, over the 2 years that I've been here, we've been reshaping our own directorate, but how we then work within countries. So within the cybercrime threat response side, that's where we work with private partners. Now, we have the ability to bring in data from our private partners. GDPR is something I'm sure a number of people on this conference are very familiar with, and we have our own rules of processing data. So we have to be very careful that we remain in line with Interpol's rules of processing data. We can bring police data sets into Interpol. We can share those police data sets as well, because the 194 member countries have agreed that. But we can also share data and information with our private partners. Now, when we look at our private partners, we've got organisations and companies such as BT from the United Kingdom, Fortinet, Cisco, Trend Micro, Kaspersky, Group IB, Bizo. We're also now working with China to identify some private partners in China that could share data with us. And again, because of our neutral aspect, we're able to bring those data sets in effectively. But then we have to do something with it. It's all well and good getting this data in. So our cybercrime threat response look across the different data sets from public-private partners, from law enforcement, and they try to identify those key indicators that link the crime types effectively. Then we share that into the member countries as actioned intelligence through different types of products, such as cyber activity reports, cyber threat assessments as well, but also we carry out regional threat assessments. So we just finished the one for Africa, which will hopefully be published shortly, but we have the Asian one as well. And that looks at those regional threats. That would then lead into our operational side. So you have a threat assessment, you then have regional operation desks. So how do we better coordinate, facilitate in the regions? Now, in Europe, we have EC3, which comes under Europol. Absolutely brilliant. Coordinated, funded, legislation is similar as well, but it just works on a regional basis. So Interpol's role is to work with Europol and EC3 about how we can facilitate operations with the countries in those regions. But also then, how could Interpol be used as that neutral interloper on the operations side to link into those other regions and those countries where it might be harder for certain countries to work into? So that looks at it then potentially through that geopolitical lens as well. So again, we're neutral. We don't have to get involved in those country-to-country disagreements that are sometimes there or differences. We can then bring those countries together. So that's where we're now looking to develop the programme further and looking, for example, at ransomware at the moment. We held our global forum on ransomware back on the 12th of July. We had a key number of recommendations and actions which we're now following up with different countries, and we're doing it under a model of prevention, detection, investigation and disruption. So good core policing capabilities about how we can then combat that cybercrime type. So developing the operations with the member countries, we've then used the private data as well. And a recent example of that was in Nigeria, where with one of our private partners, we identified a whole organised crime network, which were looking at sort of phishing campaigns, business email compromise. We identified and arrested 3 of the main offenders in there. But then we've taken the data from what we got from that arrest, and we've now turned that into more operational pieces that we can do as well, with a further 500 potential actors identified. So how can we then work to disrupt those actors further. Now, in Germany, I know there is a great use of data and information with German policing. So one of the things I'm looking to do, and I think you've got Heike later on this conference as well, is how can we better work with Germany and other partners so we can start aggregating those national data sets at the global level. Now, this isn't about Interpol scooping up and hoovering up loads of data information. This is about us collating that data, working with those member countries, and again, looking at those identification of infrastructure and threat actors, which we can then work with countries, coordinate, facilitating those operations. So we have the cybercrime threat response, the cybercrime operations from global to regional and national. And then the final strand to that is our cyber strategy and capabilities development. So that looks in two areas. First of all, at the strategy side. So what strategies do we need? And then also the capabilities. Now, with capabilities, we now have two global platforms for law enforcement. One's a knowledge exchange for sharing non-operational information about cybercrime. And the second one is an operational platform where we can bring together certain countries that are working in operations and private partners on a secure, scalable platform to undertake those operational discussions, meetings, and share data as well. So we're not sending it via emails, we're not spending spreadsheets, great big volume of data sets. We're doing it on a secure Interpol platform. Now, the operations platform and the knowledge one has also been developed for all of policing as well, so not just for cybercrime. And then the final part is the strategy side of this. So this is where we work with member countries, with regions, to help develop their own strategies, looking at identification of training needs and things like that as well. So we do that on a national level. On a regional level, I'll be in Tunis at the end of this month at the regional dialogue, and that's with Interpol, Europol, Asiapol, Afropol. So bringing together the regional policing organisations and looking about what are their priorities, how are they working with the member countries, but our member countries as well, where can we better align our resources, reduce that duplication. And then the final part now is the global ones we're involved in, such as the new Convention on Cybercrime. So Interpol now is able to speak globally at those sorts of events and the new ad hoc committee that's been set up. So that's going to be a 3-year process where we have permanent observer status at the UN. So then we will then be that global voice for law enforcement on the neutral side, looking at how can we help develop what law enforcement needs to reduce the global impact of cybercrime and protect communities for a safer world. So it's on the cascading methodology that we use on any programme where we have the project supporting that. And also Interpol, we're made up of seconded officials and contract officials. So as you highlighted, I'm a seconded official from the United Kingdom. So I bring in my skills and my experience from the United Kingdom. But I'm also bringing in 3 assistant directors, one from China, who's going to work on capabilities and strategy, one from Australia, who's working on our cybercrime threat response, and one from the US on our cybercrime operations. And again, we've got a whole number of officers sitting within our directorate as well, from different countries with different levels of experience and skills. And I have to say, coming into Interpol, I didn't really realise beforehand that the reach and the scope and scale that it has. So I've had a learning experience since I've been here for the last 2 years. And whilst I'm still here, developing the new strategy with the other directors as well, and our Executive Director of Police Services, Stephen Kavanagh, under the leadership of our Secretary General from Germany as well, Jürgen Stock, we have a really strong leadership now globally for policing, not just in cybercrime, but also in organised emerging crime and counter-terrorism as well. So I think I've rushed through quite quickly some of the different parts to what we're doing at the moment. And maybe, Andreas, if you've got any further comments or questions you'd like to ask me, please feel free.
Yeah, I do. And thanks a lot for this fascinating journey through Interpol and its activities in fighting cybercrime. And really, the first question that comes to mind for me is one about hope. Seeing, you mentioned the case of Falcon in Nigeria, for instance, and I imagine those folks being, not too well organized, not having a big bureaucracy in the background. And on the other hand, we have Interpol with 194 member states and I suppose quite some bureaucracy. So, as we know, in the world of cybercrime, everything is about speed. How do you speed up?
Absolutely, and I think you've made a really good point there, and one that I was going to come on to as well. You know, criminals look to take advantage of vulnerabilities, and we saw during COVID-19, people talked about cybercrime, you know, going through the ceiling, skyrocketing. It didn't really. What happened was the criminals latched onto a vulnerability and they exploited it. So they used current sort of tools, techniques, and procedures to then do phishing campaigns, or you know the emails they used to send out, or the non-delivery frauds as well, where PPE, protected personal equipment, they offered it for sale online, and people were desperate and they wanted the equipment, so they paid the money up front. The romance scams as well. There was more digitalisation over this period where more people went online, and you know not everybody is careful what they do online as well. So the criminals know this and they look to take advantage of this. So the speed that they're able to adapt, being in smaller groups potentially, but also not having to follow rules, processes, and things like that as well. So we have to, and there are checks and balances quite rightly in place for countries, for law enforcement to follow. But this is where then we need to look at, well, what's our model going forward? Do we put more into the coordination and prevention side to reduce the vulnerabilities? And I would say, yes, we do. The attack surfaces have got greater. So we have to look at that sort of effort then between law enforcement and international partners, international organisations. And then how does Interpol funnel that information out into the regions and also into the national level as well? But also another factor of this is for some countries it's not a priority. So the online crime may not be reported. So therefore it's not reported, it won't necessarily be a priority. And we've seen this, I think, through the ransomware piece going at the moment. When it really starts impacting, when it really starts disrupting society, that's when society, through the government and law enforcement, then say, well, we have to address this. So it's like any sort of an emergency or vulnerability which, you know, scales up. Yeah. That's unfortunately over times when the governments take responsibility or say we're going to do something about this, because there's having that direct impact on our communities. And as I said at the start, you know, we look at the sort of protection of life and property and prevention of crime, that sort of plays through that agenda then.
As we both know, Nigeria and for that part, most of West African countries do have a lot of other problems as well, starting with the economy. In the case of Falcon, how could Interpol convince them to take this seriously and lead to success at the end of the day?
So when we look at the investigative model for cybercrime, and this happens quite a lot, is we may go to a country where the threat actors are, and the country will say, well, yeah, but we've got no victims, so therefore it's not a crime. Or it may not be a crime in that country because the legislation isn't there for it. We're very fortunate with Nigeria. They've now got some very good capabilities within law enforcement. And we were able to go in there and share the private partner data sets, which clearly pointed to the threat actors, where they were operating from. So really gave them a fantastic sort of intelligence package to work with, and we supported that. But also building on that, over the last few years, a number of countries have worked in the sort of Western Africa region to help build some of those capabilities. And they've provided the witness statements, which have then led to successful prosecutions within those countries. So taking the sort of data and information and evidence from one country where the victims are and then prosecuting in another country, it is a model that is shown to work. Yes, we can look at extradition as well, so that's another model, but we look at the extradition process sometimes takes a very long time. But also the other factor of this is we've had investment. So we've had investment from one country into Interpol now to set up a regional operations against cybercrime desk in Africa. So that is now bringing specific resources into Singapore, but also us putting officers, seconded officers into 4 of the countries in Africa, but also supported by specialised officers as well. And we're only able to do that because of the funding that we have. So it's recognised as a problem, we have funding allocated to it, and then we're able to do the work in that country for a project. But that's not sustainable. It's sustainable that we can build the resource and support the country for a period of time. But when we look in countries that, don't have access to transport, don't have access to some of the basic tools that they need to undertake cybercrime or any sort of crime operations, that is when we have to look at how do we fund that model going forward. Mm-hmm. So again, within the EU context, we look at some of the programs going on the EU, Council of Europe that are funded globally now as well. So you can see that international elements of national crime strategies or cybercrime strategies recognises that actually we're being impacted from abroad. So they write, and countries write very nice strategies. Now we're starting to see some of the funding coming into place for that. But again, this is why, our cybercrime programme that I said when I came in 2.5 years ago, I said, this is a minimum 5 to 10 year piece of work. This is changing policing, the way we work, in that online space ourselves. We have to be more flexible. We have to be more adaptable. We have to break out of those sort of molds that we are used to working in. The trust model in cybersecurity, we hear the no trust model all the time, or zero trust. In policing, we have to trust. We have to trust ourselves. We have to have the trust of the community in the work that we do. So in fact, the zero trust model does not work for us in policing. We have to build that trust, and that takes time as well. And that also comes back into sort of some of that countries trusting each other. If they don't, well, Interpol can then come into that space. We can be that neutral interlocutor, and then we can draw those countries together on an operational basis. And that's one of our goals in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, is to build that model out where Interpol are that neutral interlocutor. We work with our regional colleagues as well in regional organisations, but also on a national basis as well.
Director Jones, fascinating. The bad news is that incredible, but we're already running out of time because it is so fascinating. We would have questions for another 2 hours, I guess. For our audience, concerning PPP, you mentioned that you have to work with corporates, and some you named are part of this conference as well, of course. Would you be open to more partnerships?
Yeah, so we're building that project out now. Resolution 2019, it's in our core work, so I don't need to go back and ask permission anymore. So what we're looking at doing is, everything comes back to our mandate of reduce the global impact of cybercrime and protecting communities for a safer world. So aggregating of data, working with private partners that have that understanding of what's going on in the crime area, or what infrastructure is hosting, or how the criminals are using the financial structures, and the sort of virtual currency one going forward when we're looking at disrupting the criminals, having a view of what's going on there. We're working with the World Economic Forum as well very closely, Wolfsburg Group and others as well. So trying to get at that correct level that we can bring the data and information in, but then we can turn it around and share it as well with our member countries. That's really important and key to that.
Let us close with a little vision. I mean, we here in Germany had we still have the aftermath of the spectacular Emotet case, of course, and we had in the period of COVID, we had university closures, for instance, with ransomware attacks here in my state of Hessen, at the Technical University in Berlin. Other cases. What is your outlook? I mean, you have the bird's eye perspective worldwide, but at the same time, a close look at European affairs when it comes to cybersecurity. Are you still positive? Are you still, do you have a good perspective also for the public, not only for the professionals who are involved in the field?
So my glass is always half full. I am positive in this respect. I think as we learn and go forward, that prevention key and making ourselves safe online. So when we're using the different online tools, the different capabilities, we've got different layers. So we've got individuals, we've got companies and organisations, we've got governments as well. So what can individuals do to protect themselves? Because there's no such thing as a free lunch, as we say. So when you sign up for something, you know, you are giving something away normally in return. So we need to be aware of what we're doing online. From organisations as well, you know, how do you protect yourself as an organisation? How do you reduce your vulnerabilities? How do you mitigate that? And then the governments as well, looking at protecting critical national infrastructure. So doing it on a number of different levels. Unfortunately, we learn by our mistakes as well. So sometimes there will be the mistakes, but so long as we learn from those and we do that target hardening going forward, and we make it more difficult for the criminals to come through those front doors in the online space as well.
So we need law enforcement, we need tech, but more than anything else, we need people, you're saying?
Yes, so people, process and technology. We need people to buy into it. We need to understand the technology that we're doing, and also we need the processes in place as well to help support all of our law enforcement activities, but also support the processes within the organisation to make them more secure and less susceptible to cybercrime attacks.
Craig Jones, leading Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate. Many, many thanks for your insight and sharing it. I would have loved to speak with you for another like 2-3 hours, but I guess we really have a glimpse of the efforts you are undertaking. All the best for you. Many, many thanks.
Andreas, thank you very much, and I hope the rest of the conference goes very well. Thank you.